Hello, my name is Brittany Kabinski and I just want to welcome everyone. It is now 1 p.m. so we will begin our presentation shortly. Today on November 2nd we will have our presentation on Chesapeake Bay Restoration given by Jeffrey Corbin, Anthony Moore, and John Carlock. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box and we will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. Here's a list of the sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible. As you can see, we have quite a few webcasts coming up in the next few months. To register for these upcoming webcasts, please visit www.utah-apa.org/webcasts and register for your webcast of choice. We are now offering distance education webcasts to help you get your ethics and law credits before the end of the year. These webcasts are available to view at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. To log your distance education CM credits, go to www.planning.org/CM, select Activities by Provider, select APA Ohio Chapter, then select Distance Education and select your webcast of choice. You can now follow us on Twitter at Planning Webcast or like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast Series sponsored by chapters, divisions, and universities. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM, select today's date, November 2nd, and then select today's webcast, Chesapeake Bay Restoration. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We are recording today's webcast and it will be available along with a 6-slide per page PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. At this time, I would like to introduce Jennifer Cowley, who will introduce our speakers for today, Jeffrey Corbin, Anthony Moore, and John Carlock.
Great. Thank you very much, Brittany. My name is Jennifer Cowley, and I serve as the webcast coordinator for the APA Chapters, Divisions, and Universities webcast series. And today, our sponsor of this webcast is the APA Regional and Intergovernmental Planning Division. I serve as one of their members and as a representative on today's webcast. Bob Leiter is the division chair, and I'm here to help introduce our speakers. We will be having another division webinar on the Chesapeake Bay Restoration project that's going to be focused on Virginia, but also with a federal overview. And so we're expecting that that's going to be coming in late May. So you can pay attention in the new year for that to come forward. So we have 3 great speakers with us today. Mr. Moore is presently the Assistant Secretary of the Virginia Department of Natural Resources for Chesapeake Bay Restoration under Governor McDonnell. He also served as the Assistant Secretary of the Department in the late 90s, and then from 2000 to 2002 as the Director of Policy for the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. From 2003 to 2008, Mr. Moore was a senior policy advisor in the U.S. EPA Office of Water, where he developed market-based programs to protect and restore our environment. He also directed that office's legislative programs before he went to work for the state and federal government. He was a chemist with Dominion Power, and he's a graduate of Virginia Military Institute. Mr. Carlock is the Deputy Executive Director of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, which serves the greater Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Newport News area. As such, he manages the Commission's water resources, regional planning, economics, housing, emergency management, and community affairs and public information programs. He was also an employee of the Commission's predecessor organization, the Southeastern Virginia Planning District Commission. Mr. Carlock has served as the chairman of the Virginia Recycling Markets Development Council, and in 2004 was appointed to the Virginia Water Resources Research Center statewide advisory board. He served as an adjunct professor of geography at Old Dominion University, and he has a master's degree in city and regional planning from Southern Illinois University. Finally, Mr. Corbin is a senior advisor to EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson for the Chesapeake Bay and Anacostia River. As such, he serves as the chief liaison among the Office of the EPA Administrator, federal, state, and local government partners, and community and nonprofit stakeholders. He's also served as Senior Advisor to the EPA Region 3 Administrator. From 2006 to 2009, Mr. Corbin served as the Assistant Secretary for the Virginia Department of Natural Resources under Governor Kane. He also spent nearly 10 years as the Virginia Deputy Director and Senior Scientist for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. He has a master's degree in oceanography from the University of Rhode Island. And Mr. Corbin's going to kick off our presentation today. So please, everyone, we'll look forward to the presentation.
All right, well, thank you. This is Jeff Corbin. Thank you for the
muted.
And I'm going to start by kind of giving you a 30,000-foot flyover here of the Bay restoration efforts, kind of past, present, and future, and obviously it'll have a little bit of a federal tint to it since I'm currently with the United States Environmental Protection Agency. But as they said in my bio, I've been with the Commonwealth of Virginia working on Bay restoration issues, and I've also been on the nonprofit environmental side. So hopefully I've sat at the table at a lot of different positions on this effort, so hopefully that diversity will bring a little bit of a unique perspective to this. So let me go ahead and jump right in, I think. It's this button, right? All righty. Just some real quick, for those of you who are not familiar with the Chesapeake Bay region, it is the biggest estuary in North America. I believe it's the third largest in the world. 64,000 square mile watershed, extremely abundant diversity of fish, wildlife, and plants, huge economic engine for the states in the Chesapeake Bay region. In fact, we're getting ready to do an update on what the benefits, cost benefits will be from a fully restored Chesapeake Bay. A lot of people live in the watershed, and this is one of the problems that makes the restoration effort challenging. Currently about 17 million, and I believe the projection is by 2030 to have almost 20 million people living in the Bay watershed. 6 states, or at least parts of 6 states in the District of Columbia, are in the watershed, about 1,800 local governments. And really what makes it challenging is I'm going to show you a chart here in a minute of what we do on the land has a really big impact on what happens to water quality. And this is a chart that shows that if you take the ratio of the amount of water in a water body, so for example the Bay or the Gulf of Finland like you see here on the chart, and you take that ratio to the amount of land that drains into it, you end up with a ratio, and you can see they're fairly small on this chart, and that's because if you add the Chesapeake Bay, the ratio is about 14:1, and it's the largest ratio of watershed to volume of any coastal water on the planet. And that makes it extremely challenging because what it means is that the impacts that we have on the water have a really huge impact on what happens on water quality, more so than in any other coastal water body on the planet. So this is one of the challenges that we face. It's because the Bay, although it looks big on a map, is very shallow, and it has an extremely large watershed that drains into it. Now I'm going to talk mostly today about water quality and about the TMDL, the total maximum daily load that we're currently working to implement with the states, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that President Obama back in May of 2009 issued an executive order on the Chesapeake Bay. It established a federal leadership committee, EPA. Lisa Jackson chairs that leadership committee, and we have developed a strategy, and we will develop annual plans and annual progress reports. And you can see the first version of that that's out on the web, and this, if you look on the right there, these are a lot of the different issues that the states and the federal government agencies will be working together on over the next decade or more. I am going to focus today just on one of these, water quality. So I always like to start by reminding people why we're doing this. Even though we've made significant progress restoring the Chesapeake Bay, we still have very significant water quality impacts. We have low dissolved oxygen levels, which manifest themselves as fish kills. We have very extensive algae blooms. This is down in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia from just this past summer. And we have a very high sediment loads, very, very murky, very cloudy water. And those are the 3 pollutants, those are the 3 impairments that we are trying to address in the Bay restoration with respect to water quality: dissolved oxygen levels, clarity, and chlorophyll A, which is a surrogate for algae levels. This is simply, I put this in here, this is simply another shot to show you what happens when we get a lot of rain and the sediment that washes off all the different land uses in the watershed. This is from this past summer when we had the back-to-back tropical storm and hurricane that came through the region. And although this is a rather dramatic rain event, anytime we get a significant rainfall event in the Bay region, you can get this similar sort of satellite photo of sediment running off. So again, we have significant issues with runoff from non-point sources. A little bit about the partnership, and this truly is a partnership that we've been using for more than 3 decades in the Chesapeake Bay region. We actually have a specific budget where the EPA Chesapeake Bay Program Office is actually established in the Clean Water Act. And early on, and I'm going to go over a bit more specifics here about the agreements that have been signed, but early on, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, District of Columbia, and then the Chesapeake Bay Commission, which is a tri-state legislative body, they were the original signatories to this agreement. But early on in 2000 and 2002, we've now signed an MOU with the headwater states, Delaware, New York, and West Virginia, so that all states and the district are now full partners of the Chesapeake Watershed Program. I'm not going to walk you through this chart. I just want to show you that we do have a structure. Some might say we are overstructured, but we have a very detailed structure that we operate with the program, so issues that we address and the solutions that we come up with work their way through a process that begins with work groups at the staff level that include federal agencies, state agencies, and outside partners, and then it works its way up through the process all the way to the top level that we call the Executive Council, and that is currently chaired by Lisa Jackson, the Administrator of EPA. So a little bit of history with a Virginia tinge to it here. The first agreement that the Bay State signed was back in 1983. Very simple, 1 page, acknowledging that there was a problem. There was about a decade worth of science that led up to this agreement, but it was very simple, saying that we need to come together, we need to work together. In '87, that agreement went further, and that's where we started realizing that we needed to really reduce nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment entering our rivers. In '92, we realized that really where a lot of the reductions had to come from were up into the watershed, up into the headwaters of the tributaries, and that's when states started developing what we call tributary strategies. Virginia developed and adopted a number of those. The first one was for the Shenandoah and Potomac back in '96. And then in the late 90s, there was a number of lawsuits that were challenging the states and federal government over what they claimed is failure to implement the TMDL program. And there were court settlements that came out of that that largely set up schedules for developing TMDLs, which are cleanup plans for impaired waters, which included the Chesapeake Bay and the tidal waters. Because as you see in 1999, the entire bay and the tidal portions of the major rivers were listed on Virginia's 303D list, or the impaired waters list. There were more tributary strategies for individual rivers developed in '99 and 2000. The last big partnership agreement was in 2000, often referred to as the Chesapeake 2000 agreement. And there's over 100 commitments in that agreement. Just one of them had to do with water quality, and that was we would actually we'd go beyond what we had set for pollution reductions earlier, and we'd actually achieve enough pollution reductions to delist these waters and get them off of the impaired waters list. And if we didn't, then we would have to go down this approach and start developing a Chesapeake Bay TMDL. In 2005, Virginia developed another statewide tributary strategy, and then there was a law passed in Virginia in '06 that required annual cleanup plans, and those were developed from '06 through '09. And now where we are, for a number of reasons, because of the 2000 agreement, because of court challenges, and because of the Clean Water Act, we are now in a situation where we have to develop a Bay TMDL, and that's because we simply, although we've made progress, we have not made enough to delist these waters from the 303 impaired waters list. So what is this thing? What is a TMDL? It stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. Very simple. You set the amount, the allowable amount of pollution that can go into an impaired water, which for this TMDL is the entire bay and the tidal tributaries. You divide it up among the states. You give each state their allocations for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. The states then have the ability to divide that up among the various pollution sources. You develop your plans and you implement your plans. So why is this any different? If we've been trying to restore the bay for 30 years, why is the TMDL different? And it's mainly different because the TMDL has a significant amount of accountability built into this process. We have to have assurance, what we call reasonable assurance, that the states can actually implement what they say that they're going to do in their plans to achieve these pollution reduction allocations. It's a stepwise progress, and I'll talk more about this. We're going to be measuring this in 2-year chunks, what we're calling 2-year milestones. 2017 is the halfway point. We've set a goal to get 60% of all the practices needed in place by 2017, and we'd get all the practices in place by 2025. And although this date is solidified in the TMDL and in other documents, this date was actually set by the Bay partners through the Executive Council, that top level of the program that I mentioned earlier. It's going to be an extremely transparent program. It has been so far, and it's going to become even more so. And then the last bullet I have here in red is because this is the one that tends to draw most of the attention, is that if we do fall behind, if we don't stay on track to achieve these pollution reduction measures that we need, then we will contemplate some sort of federal action. And there's a handful of things that we could do under existing Clean Water Act authority, and I will go over those in a minute. And I always remind people that although the TMDL is a different process than we've used in the past, the pollution levels that we're shooting for are very close, if not the same levels that we've been shooting for many, many years. And this slide is actually a little bit outdated, but if you look at 1985, this is just for nitrogen. There was 341 million pounds of nitrogen going into the Bay watershed every year. In 2009, we'd gotten that down to below 250. Our 2010 numbers are about to come out. I think they're going to be about 6 million pounds lower. So we continue to make progress. The tributary strategies that we've been developing that I showed you in the earlier slides would have gotten us to 190. And the allocation that the states have been given under the TMDL, and again, I apologize, this is an old slide, but the allocation for the TMDL is right around 190. So the TMDL is definitely a different process, but again, the numbers that we're shooting for as far as a restored bay are pretty much the same ones we've been shooting for a few decades now. So there's 4 parts to this. The TMDL is actually the second one there on the chart. The first one are the state's watershed implementation plans. They get to develop how these actions are going to be implemented on the ground to achieve the allocations that they're given through the TMDL. Those plans fed into the TMDL. They broke these allocations down into much smaller sectors and into individual waste load allocations for permits. That fed into the TMDL that we published last December 29th of 2010. The third part of the 2-year milestones, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, and that's how we make sure that we stay on track. And then the fourth part is just, as I mentioned a minute ago, these potential federal actions that we could take if insufficient progress is made. So really quickly about each one of these 4. The watershed implementation plans, or what I refer to as that is how we divide up the pollution pie. And it's almost Thanksgiving, so I elevated pumpkin pie for the selected slice today. But the science, and I'll tell everybody on this call, I mean, literally a week does not go by where at our Chesapeake Bay program office in Annapolis that we don't have some group from somewhere in the nation or even the world. In the last month we've had China and Australia in looking at how we're doing this and looking at all the information that we have and trying to figure out whether or not this is the approach that they should use to try and clean up their water bodies. So we have an amazing amount of science and monitoring and modeling that is really the envy of other bay restoration programs. So the science tells you how big the pie is. The watershed implementation plans are where the states get to divide up what those slices of the pie are going to look like. Those plans also include the strategies. This is not just a numbers game. The watershed implementation plans have to include the strategies as to how they're actually going to achieve the reductions that are in their plan. So each state developed one, even the headwater states of Delaware, New York, and West Virginia developed them. So all 6 states in D.C. developed their watershed implementation plans. We went through a few versions of those, and those are what fed into the TMDL that was issued last December. Where we are now is the plans that the states developed we called Phase 1. They were kind of focused on the state level, the major river basin level. What they're doing now is they're working with localities, and I think this is what John Carlock's going to be talking about today, is we're reaching out to the localities, to local governments, to counties, to cities, to planning district commissions, to soil and water conservation districts, so that they understand what their portion of the responsibility is going to be in order for Virginia to implement enough actions to actually achieve their TMDL allocations. So what the Phase 2 WIP should tell you is who are your local partners, who are you working with, are they aware of these strategies, do they know what their role is going to be to implement these strategies, how is each jurisdiction working with its partners, what are the strategies that you're going to use at the local level to actually facilitate increased levels of implementation. So how are you actually going to go from the level you're at now to implementing significant enough practices to achieve your TMDL allocations. And I'll tell you a little bit about the time frame of when these Phase 2s are going to be developed in a minute. The third thing I showed you on the earlier slide was the 2-year milestones, and this is a bit of a noisy slide, but it's basically just to let you know that let's use a theoretical example. Suppose it's 2011, we've got till 2025, we've got 14 years. Suppose Virginia has a 14 million pound nitrogen reduction to achieve. They don't necessarily need to achieve 1 million pounds every year. Some states might start getting significant reductions right up front. They might think that they've got all the programs they need, and they're simply going to crank up implementation either through more people or more money or whatever it takes. Some states might choose an approach that they need to that they need new regulations, or they need new statutory authority, or they need to revise their budget. So maybe they don't get as much reductions in the first couple of years, but the red line shows you that they would get significant more reductions in the out years. But again, the point is, we're at 2011 on the left. We need to get 60% of the practices on the ground by 2017, and we need to get them all on the ground by 2025. And there's a number of different paths that you can take to get there. We will be tracking this. If you go to the EPA's Chesapeake Bay program website, and I'm sorry I didn't put it up here, but it's chesapeakebay.net, one word, chesapeakebay.net. And if you go there, I think it's right on the front page, you can get to a tool that we call Chesapeake Stat. And the kind of the wizard behind the curtain of Chesapeake Stat is this WEBCAST tool. It stands for Tracking and Accounting System, I believe. And that is where users, including the states, including federal governments, including anybody who wants to use this tool, can look and see what kind of progress we're making and why we're having problems if we're not hitting our targets. We plan to further develop this tool and actually use it as a management tool as we go forward. So at the staff level and at the policymaker level, we'll be looking at this and seeing where we're achieving reductions and where we're not achieving reductions, why are we not? And this will be one of the tools that we use to see how we adaptively manage this process as we move forward. The last one I had was in the slide earlier was federal actions. It is my sincere hope that we don't have to use any of these federal actions against states. I can tell you right now that in the last 3 years, all the states have significantly increased their implementation levels, and we'll be finding out if that sustained level is enough to get them to where they need to be by 2025. But I can tell you that all the states, from looking at their initial watershed implementation plans, have taken this process very seriously. But if we do fall behind, what are some of the things we can do? These are existing Clean Water Act authorities. We can expand coverage of NPDES, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits. Those are federal permits, many of them issued by the states. We can increase oversight of those permits. We can require additional pollution reductions from permitted sources, and this is one of the issues that is very unique to a TMDL. If we do not get reductions from the non-permitted sources, we will probably have to go back and get additional reductions from the permitted sources. That's why it was very important when we reviewed states' plans to see if we had assurance that they could achieve significant non-point source reductions from the non-permitted sector. We could increase federal enforcement. Obviously, EPA has significant enforcement authority under the Clean Water Act. We could prohibit new or expanded discharges. Again, a TMDL is a pollution cap. You have to get down to that level, and you have to stay under that level. If we don't stay under the cap, we could consider prohibiting or expanding or prohibiting new or expanded discharges under the various permitting programs. We could move money around. I don't think taking money away from a state that is having trouble meeting their allocations is going to help much, but we can certainly move the various grant monies around to areas that are producing the best results. We could revise water quality standards. That's something we can always do through the TMDL or through the standard triennial review process. And then the eighth one is just a catch-all of whatever other federal actions as needed. So again, these are all existing authorities. This is not an expansion of anything that we plan to use with the TMDL. These are always tools that we've had, and we can use them as appropriate if we need to adjust this process along the way. Just very quickly, some dates. I've talked about milestones. I've talked about watershed implementation plans. The states right now, the first date you see in red is November 1st. They are actually giving us what we call input decks, which are their spreadsheets that include all the practices that they want to put on the ground in the next 2 years. So they are developing their first 2-year milestones. We are running those through our modeling tools to see what kind of reductions they will get, and they will finalize that by early January. At the same time, they're working on their Phase 2 watershed implementation plans. We will see a draft in mid-December. We will have considerable conversations with the states and back and forth, and then we will have final Phase 2 watershed implementation plans at the end of March. And then after that, we implement those plans. Up until now, it's largely been planning and modeling and moving numbers around and doing model runs. At that point, it's time to start implementing the plans or increase implementation of the plans until we get to 2017. This is where phase 3 will kick in. We have agreed to do a comprehensive assessment in 2017. We will have more data. We will have better modeling tools. We will have a lot more of everything, and it's going to be time to take a step back and evaluate what our progress was, and then actually develop a third plan that would put much more detail into what the jurisdictions and local governments are going to achieve in the last leg of this from 2017 to 2025. So we will essentially do this process again leading up to 2017. And that is all I have for my portion of the presentation.
Good afternoon. This is Anthony Moore, and I am the Assistant Secretary for Chesapeake Bay Restoration for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thanks for the opportunity of letting me participate in this American Planning Association webinar. With my background, we just read my bio earlier, but I just want to let people know that I spent about 15 years in a power station as a chemist. A part of those duties were to evaluate water and air discharges to make sure that they were below our permit requirements. Spent a couple of years in the Secretary of Natural Resources office as the Assistant Secretary and then the Policy Director for DEQ, where I worked really closely with Chesapeake Bay issues. As a Senior Policy Advisor at EPA, I worked closely with Region 3 and the Chesapeake Bay, EPA Region 3 and the Chesapeake Bay program on Chesapeake Bay issues. So I'd like to start off, and I think this is the same slide that Jeff showed. The numbers, I think, are the same. But the point I want to make, and the same point that Jeff made, is that the Chesapeake Bay program has been very successful. We think that the program has been working well through the years, and as you see on the charts here, from 1985 to 2009, the nutrient loads in the bay have been reduced approximately 30%. Now, much of these reductions have come through better management and new technologies and upgrades to wastewater treatment plants, but you can also see that other sectors such as agriculture have made significant reductions. I think agriculture reduced about 30% in those same years. So this has been a very successful program. We've probably picked most of the low-hanging fruit. So the reductions that we need to make in the future will certainly be more costly. The tributary strategies were approved in 2005, and as Jeff mentioned, that would have taken us just about to the same level of reductions as the TMDL. So the program was well on its way to making the bay cleanup goals before this TMDL was implemented. The additional reductions from the tributary strategies to the TMDL are very minimal bay-wide. In Virginia, phosphorus loads in the Chesapeake Bay have decreased about 37% from 1985 to 2000, and the difference in reductions from the tributary strategies to the TMDL were only about 1.3 million pounds per year. So it's not all doom and gloom. The Chesapeake Bay is being restored, fishery populations are improving, and we are making progress in other areas to continue our restoration goals. Jeff mentioned future dates, and again, for this year, 2011 to 2012, we're expecting revisions to the Chesapeake Bay model for some deficiencies that were realized last year. That was due to be completed by June 30th. Unfortunately, that was completed only about 30 days late, so we had those upgrades to the model, which I'll talk a little bit about later. This year, the states also have to develop their Phase 2 WIPs. The Phase 2 plans are expected to be developed with actions that are proposed at a smaller local scale, and they have to be submitted to EPA by December the 15th. EPA takes about a month, a little bit less than a month, to review those Phase 2 WIPs and make comments on them, and then the states or jurisdictions have to submit their final Phase 2 WIPs by March the 30th. For 2017, again, 60% of our plans must be in place. We look at progress of our plans and make adjustments, and look at model performance and make adjustments there, and then we would submit another Phase 3 WIP in 2017. And by 2025, 100% of our program needs to be in place. And then I'll just go through a couple of things that Virginia has proposed. The Commonwealth has developed its Phase 1 WIP, which was approved by EPA in December of last year and included in their Chesapeake Bay TMDL. The plan allows flexibility in implementation to ensure cost-effective practices are given priorities. The WIP includes programs that were already in place and programs that could be expanded, and we'll also look at some new programs. So this WIP is not a totally new program. Some of the future proposals that we will make in Virginia, and some of these proposals may take legislative action. We think that we will meet our goals for wastewater through the watershed general permit that establishes caps in each watersheds for all the significant discharges. Now, this allows wastewater treatment plants, if they they can generate credits by doing more than they have to do, and for those wastewater treatment plants that can't quite meet their goals, they're allowed to buy credits to help them to meet their goals. And some water treatment plants are doing this by having upgrades or making upgrades. They aren't at capacity yet, so some of those wastewater treatment plants would have credits that they can buy and sell. We also proposed to reduce nitrogen loads to the James River by about 2.6 million pounds and phosphorus loads by 200,000 pounds. That's strictly in the James River basin. We think that upgrading two significant wastewater treatment plants in the James River will help us to meet their goals. We will propose that new facilities under 1,000 gallons per minute per day have to offset their entire nutrient loads. And we'll also propose that for the dischargers that expand from 1,000 gallons per day to 40,000 gallons per day will also have to offset their entire nutrient loads. So by the end of this plan, all new facilities will have to offset their entire nutrient load. The plan proposes stormwater retrofits on existing developed land to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus in sediment. Now, when we say retrofits, that's always a term that it's like scratching your nails on a chalkboard. We're not requiring localities to dig up concrete. That's not the only way that they can meet their goals. So we want to give the localities the flexibility to find the best way to make those reductions and not necessarily dig up concrete. We also are looking at extensive implementation of resource management plans. Now, these are farm-specific plans that can use nutrient management plans, livestock exclusion, stream buffers, and soil conservation, but there would be a farm-specific plan. So we would have planners that would go out and to help farms to figure out exactly what they need to do to meet their reduction goals, and would establish these resource management plans. Well, Virginia has been very busy with this year with different projects within this watershed implementation plan program. Of course, we're working on our Phase 2 watershed implementation plan. We have a stakeholders advisory group that we're working with. Also, we're working with the planning district commissions and local governments to help us to develop this plan. We are looking at expanding our current nutrient credit exchange program. Currently, the program looks at point source exchange, and in a very few instances, it allows agriculture and stormwater to exchange credits. We would like to expand that program so that agriculture, stormwater, and on-site septic can participate fully in the plan and buy and sell credits. We're currently conducting a study. That study should be completed before the end of this year and presented to the General Assembly. And the General Assembly would act on that next year, we would hope. We're conducting a chlorophyll study on the James River. We feel that there's new science on chlorophyll, and we are concerned with the way that our standard is applied. Virginia is unique that we're one of the few places that actually has a chlorophyll number as criteria. So we will study the chlorophyll standard so it reflects the best science and regulatory approaches. We'll continue our nutrient reduction plans and activities on all the other watersheds and on the James River, and we will take about 3 to 5 years to conclude this study and make adjustments to that criteria as needed. We're also looking at developing our 2-year milestones. Now, these will be the activities that Virginia plans to complete within the 12-13 years. We also have legislation that was passed that restricts the amount of phosphorus that can be placed into do-it-yourself lawn maintenance fertilizer. After December of 2012, we feel that this will help us to meet our goals. Currently, Scotts has told us that they will have a phosphorus-free fertilizer by 2012, so this will help us to meet the goals. And we're also studying to see if slow-release nitrogen can be used to help us to meet our goals. Also in that legislation, it requires nutrient management plans on all municipally owned lands and golf courses that use fertilizer. So that fertilizer bill and the work that we're doing with fertilizer will definitely help us to meet our goals. I mentioned the resource management plans earlier, and we have a stakeholders advisory group that's putting that program together also. So now we look at the Chesapeake Bay region in Virginia. And we had to determine what was the best way for us to collect information and develop this Phase 2 program. As you can see by this diagram, the planning district commissions are enveloped in black. There are 32 soil and water conservation districts that are in gold. The segment sheds are listed here, and also 96 localities. And this doesn't include numerous towns and other entities that we have to work with. So we thought it would be effective for the Commonwealth to work directly with the planning district commissions to develop our Phase 2 plan. After we developed the Phase 1 WIP, I and staff from the Department of Conservation and Recreation and the Department of Environmental Quality went out to visit the 16 PDCs that are in the Chesapeake Bay area watershed to let them know, first of all, what was in the Phase 1 WIP, and then to ask them to help us to develop this Phase 2 WIP. And then, I'm not sure if John will talk to you a little bit more about that, but he's been essential to helping us to develop this plan. In developing the Phase 2 WIP, the EPA gave us guidance on March 30th that helped us to determine how to develop this Phase 2 WIP. That required us to go out to the jurisdictions and divide the Bay TMDL allocations into local area targets. We were supposed to work with local stakeholders, including elected officials and staff and conservation districts, watershed associations, and citizens to identify specific controls and practices to be implemented by 2017. We're also supposed to look at specific controls and practices in the first 2-year milestones that are submitted after development of the Phase 1 WIP. So as we were doing this, looking at the allocations and dividing these allocations from the state level to the local area, we found several anomalies in the model when we're developing these target loads. We're working with EPA to resolve some of these anomalies before the 2-year milestones are evaluated and before the Phase 2 WIPs are evaluated. We still continue to work with the localities to develop a Phase 2 plan and meet pollution reduction goals without stifling economic development or reducing jobs. I've mentioned a couple of anomalies. This is one of the anomalies that we saw when we started to divide the allocations down to the local level. This chart basically shows that the red indicates areas where nutrient management application rates are higher than corresponding non-nutrient management rates in the 2009 progress run. So basically this chart is telling us that if we use nutrient management plans, then pollution rates go up. In Virginia, there are about 42 counties where this seems to be a problem. The green charts, the green areas on this chart, the nutrient management plans actually decrease nitrogen. So it appears that there's some interaction with the changes in the BMPs that may have caused this problem, and we're working with EPA to try to fix some of these problems. Also, when you look at the changes between the two models, 5.3.0 was the model that we used to develop the Phase 1 WIP. The new model is 5.3.2. When you look at the difference in percent nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reductions, on the statewide scale, you don't see a whole lot of difference. Nitrogen is 15% and the first model and 21% in the second. So that's not much of a difference. When you go to the watershed basin, you see those numbers are still fairly close, but they're starting to get further apart. When you go to the subwatershed area, you can see many more differences. If you look at sediment and the Chickahominy subwatershed, then you see that the old model there was a 30% reduction, and in the new model there's actually 484% increase. So that means they've basically met that goal, their goal, and have credits to exchange. When you get down to the county levels, you can see that some of these anomalies are greater. If you look at James City County, in the old model, they basically had to reduce sediment by 20%, and with the new model, they actually have credits that they can exchange. So these are some of the anomalies that we receive, and as you see where some of these localities are actually getting credits in the new model, somewhere around in the state, someone has to make up for those reductions. So we're trying to make sure that we have a common sense approach to developing these Phase 2 watershed implementation plans. Some key points in this Phase 2 process, this TMDL process. The TMDL is a 15-year process. Some of these proposals will take a while to take legislative action. So this isn't something that we have to complete in the next 1 or 2 years. And development of the Phase 2 watershed implementation plans, again, we've started our outreach to the PDCs. We're looking at what's on the ground in localities and what pollution sources they are. We also look at what reduction goals they already have in place. So we don't want the localities to have to start all over again. If they have reduction plans in place that will help us to meet our goals, then they will be counted in our watershed implementation plans. If there are additional reductions that have to be made to make our goals, then we'll work with the localities and the stakeholders to find out what BMPs would help us to meet those goals. And we're also in the process of developing our 2-year milestones. So again, Virginia realizes that the Chesapeake Bay is a national treasure. We want to make sure that we continue to work to implement our plan to restore the Chesapeake Bay, and we want to make sure that we have a plan that makes sense, that will see actual on-the-ground water quality progress and not just plan to meet the model goals. So thank you for your attention. And this is my chart.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for your speech. We have a number of questions that have come in. People can feel free to type their questions into the box if they'd like.
Jennifer, we got one more.
All right. How about it?
Yeah. This is John Carlock. I'm delighted to participate on this panel. As the second or third time, I think that Jeff and Anthony and I have had the opportunity to do these kinds of things together. And as a member of the division, it's really neat to see this program moving forward. The Hampton Roads Planning District Commission is at the very southeastern Virginia, or southeast corner of Virginia. We're at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. We are the headwaters of the Albemarle-Pamlico estuarine system, so we get to play in both major bodies of water on the East Coast. We have 16 cities and counties and additional 11 towns within the region. We are very fortunate that we have one regional wastewater agency that treats the sewage from the bulk of the region. We have rural communities, urban communities, and our effort has been focused primarily on dealing with urban nutrient reductions. We're one of 21 PDCs in Virginia. There are 16 of us that are working to some degree or another together to deal with the TMDL effort. One of the issues that we had to deal with early on was the fact that the numbers are allocated from the Bay model through the state down to the localities, and those numbers were allocated by local government. Within each of our localities, we have state lands, we have federal lands, and agriculture as well as wastewater agencies, all of whom have a responsibility in this cleanup effort, and we have had to deal with trying to apportion the loads by locality down to those other sources. As a region, Hampton Roads has been involved in water quality in the Bay and our local waters for 40-some years, going back to the 1970s with the area-wide water quality management planning program with EPA in the state. We took the first regional look at non-point source pollution, actually going out sampling. We did the first regional look at how do you make these trade-offs between point and non-point sources. I guess if we had been smarter back then, we would have solved the problem, and we wouldn't be here today. Through the 80s and 90s, we maintained our involvement. We're very active through the 90s, ahead of the curve, if you will, in developing a tributary strategy program, trying to work with the localities to identify nutrient reduction strategies that would make sense and could be implemented locally. We also developed a regional stormwater program where the PDC works very closely with 12 localities that have stormwater permits, helping them with education, providing technical support, and working with our friends at the state and federal level on permit-related issues. We were actively involved with the state and the feds in developing Chesapeake Bay Agreement and making sure that our local perspective was included in that. We had staff participating on a number of the Bay Program committees, at the same time looking within the region at implementation plans for TMDLs, largely dealing with bacteria loads, recreation waters, and shellfish contamination. And as a region, developed a cooperative sanitary sewer overflow consent order with the state and with EPA that involves 14 localities and our regional wastewater agency. Over the last couple of years, we have maintained our regional process, sending local government staff and PDC staff to the various state committees, monitoring those efforts and making sure that our elected officials were aware of what was coming. At the same time, we were trying to look at the impacts of the TMDL and the Watershed Implementation Plan on our localities. Some scary numbers came out of that. Jeff talked about the EPA backstops. If we don't get to where we need to be by 2025, our first look at what would be required from the stormwater standpoint was $9.7, $9.8 billion over this 14-year period of time that our localities would have to spend. Anthony, on a number of occasions, has characterized the approach as adaptive management. Fortunately, that's the case. The numbers came down dramatically by the time Virginia finished the Phase 1 Watershed Implementation Plan. We had some of the things that the General Assembly did in 2011, and we see the numbers coming down further. We think as we refine the land use numbers and the loads by localities, that the local government cost is likely to come down further. But still substantial amounts of money, and this has certainly gotten the attention of the local elected officials. Anthony talked about the PDCs and our role in this. I won't belabor what's on this slide, but going back to the spring of last year, the state indicated that they would like the PDCs to help them and work through the process with localities. Our board, following a meeting in March and then some subsequent discussions, committed to doing that. We have created a regional steering committee that involves the local governments, the Department of Defense, who is a major landholder in Hampton Roads, our State Department of Transportation, Soil and Water Conservation Districts, the state agencies, Hampton Roads Sanitation District, that's our regional wastewater agency, and the Virginia Institute of Marine Science to provide some grounding in science as we move forward with this. This committee is a forum to look at what the localities are responsible for, to coordinate with excuse me, the state and EPA to expand opportunities for credit within the model. A number of what local governments see as appropriate practices aren't presently accounted for in the model, and we're trying to make sure that the amount of money that localities are spending on those things do in fact get them credit and reductions. And then finally, to define regional needs for additional resources, legislative authority, funding, policies, and so forth. Virginia is what's called a Dillon Rule state. For planners out there, I suspect most of us know what that is, but local governments can only do what the state enables them to do. back in that early nutrient reduction effort from 12 or 13 years ago, our localities defined fertilizer management, reduction of nitrogen and phosphorus as an appropriate vehicle for meeting the nutrient reduction targets. Localities under Virginia law were not allowed to impose those kinds of restrictions, and it's taken us a substantial period of time to get legislative authority, and in this case, the state has taken it over to restrict the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus in fertilizers. The second piece of our effort is the local tier. Each of the localities has established some sort of a excuse me, multi-department team that involves the chief administrative officer or his number two, and the heads or senior staff from a number of different agencies to work together to try and identify what can be done by the locality, define what needs to be done by other permittees and agriculture within the locality, and to review the accuracy of the information that's in the model. What did I do? Can everybody see that slide?
Yes, we can see your slide.
Okay. All right. The localities are collecting and evaluating their data, trying to identify what they can do in the short period as well as 2017 and beyond, and trying to find support, financial in particular, to move that program forward. Obviously, there are things that local governments are responsible for. They're using these as criteria and objectives in evaluating what they may propose at some point to the state. Cost effectiveness, can we implement it? Can we get substantial education and outreach from these kinds of things? And how do these activities fit within typical local government objectives like urban renewal, protection of drinking water, and economic development? I'm not moving. It's a standard joke at the PDC that if there's going to be technological problems, John will discover them, so I apologize for the technology issue here. There have been a couple of recent developments from the state and EPA in terms of correspondence and looking at some of the issues, the model issues that Anthony was talking about. And it's a question of whether the model actually gives us data and results that are appropriate at the local level, or whether it works best at the basin and larger level. Based on the correspondence which indicates that the model is probably not appropriate for use at the local level, the localities in Hampton Roads and the PDC are evaluating a bit as to how we go about doing this in the absence of numbers, which in some respects may make our lives easier. We can focus on strategies that we're probably going to have to do anyway, sewer upgrades to reduce wastewater overflows, plant more trees, connect homes to sewers in areas that are presently covered by septic tanks. A very big concern to the Hampton Roads localities has been the fact that the TMDL and the numbers in it are likely to be enforced through municipal separate storm sewer system permits. All of our localities are going to get new permits. in the next 1 to 4 years. Our understanding of the rules and regulations are that the permits must be consistent with the TMDL, and a serious concern that numbers from the model will be used to evaluate whether localities are complying with that permit or not. We have in the past indicated to EPA and to the state that we would like to see the numbers come out and a more performance-based approach work for the permits. We're working with the localities to try to make sure that they are ready for those permits when it's time for them to be renewed, and trying to work with the state to get some more guidance on how we should move forward in light of this new exchange on the model. I think the slides have now caught up with where we are. We've talked a little bit about what we are trying to do at the present time. One thing that we want to make sure is that localities have a good solid base of their land use and the VMPs on the ground, so that come 2017, when EPA reruns the model and evaluates our progress, that we have got the best information in that model that we possibly can. There are still issues and concerns that are that we're all trying to deal with. That's not going. Anthony talked about the comparison of the model results between the old model and the new one, and those localities that suddenly find themselves that they've gone way beyond what they had to do. There's probably a certain temptation out there to declare victory and go home at this point. The news media in Virginia has captured these numbers and has made a big deal of the fact that the numbers have changed dramatically, and obviously the elected officials have to consider that. They hear about it as we move forward. Major concerns continue to be the relationship between the waste load allocations in the TMDL and the permits that are about to come forward, as well as the concern on the part of elected officials that implementation of these practices, all of the work that will be done, will in fact result in water quality improvements. I think that's a particular problem at our end of the watershed, simply because the modeling does not indicate that waste discharges from Hampton Roads have a substantial impact on the water quality in the central part of the bay. I was very happy to hear Jeff talk a few minutes ago about the fact that EPA is starting to relook at what the benefits are from a cleaned up and restored bay. I think that will be helpful to all of us as we move this forward. One of the difficulties that I've faced for 15 years, I'm not sure that we have won the day yet, is what does this all mean to planners? They sit in meetings and we hear discussion of wastewater and engineering issues. In Virginia, we've had something on the books for 20 years called the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, and I think a lot of people saw that as fixing our problem. That act dealt with new development. It didn't do a whole lot for the restoration and fixing the problems that we spent 400 years creating. Where do planners fit into all this? There is considerable literature at EPA about using green infrastructure and smart growth as BMPs, if you will. I think those are areas that planners can step in and help our counterparts in the engineering community deal with these issues. I think we have to do what planners do best, and that's to bring together the disparate disciplines and try to craft solutions that work for everybody, the interdisciplinary and obviously state, federal, and local interjurisdictional kinds of things. back in my teaching days, I used to characterize 1970 versus 1990 as a time when we went from real easy solutions, technology, engineering. We had a lot of money at the time. Now we've got, as we try to restore the bay, land use, policy kinds of issues, and no money to deal with those things. So that concludes my comments. I think this last slide provides contact information for all of the folks on the panel, as well as for Lee Schenecker from the division, who has been the brains behind getting us all together. So I think we're done at this point, Jennifer.
Wonderful. So we'll go ahead and accept questions from the audience. So one of the questions was about whether or not shellfish numbers are increasing. So have you seen any positive outcomes at this point?
We have seen crab populations increasing in the Virginia area, so I think that's been very beneficial. Jeff, do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, on the shellfish side, again, when I was with the Commonwealth of Virginia, this is something that I worked on pretty extensively. Oysters are our main, we have a pretty thriving clam industry as well, but oysters are the main shellfish in the bay waters, and they're down to about 1% of what they were in the 1800s. Part of that is due because they were over-harvested. We tried to bring back the population a long time ago by bringing in an invasive, or not invasive, an intentional foreign species that brought some disease, and now that devastates our native species of oysters. However, there is some great new results coming in. We've been trying a bunch of different technologies to actually kind of genetically select the most healthy oysters in the bay and allow them to reproduce and leave them in the bay so they can get old enough to reproduce. And it's starting to look like the science is showing that we may be starting to beat this disease thing. Now, even if we are, it'll still probably be decades before we see significant oyster population back. But, you know, that could really be a game changer because oysters are a huge filter. They filter about 50 gallons a day for every single oyster. And by doing so, they remove a lot of nutrients, a lot of sediment, a lot of algae, all the things that we're trying to reduce in the bay. So if we could get oysters back, we'd have a heck of a pollution reduction mechanism in there. But it's going to be a while if we get there at all.
This is John. We've had some experience in Hampton Roads and some of the smaller tributaries with citizen efforts and locality efforts focused on those TMDLs for bacteria. And we've seen, particularly in the Lynn Haven River and Virginia Beach, a significant increase in oyster population. And the really neat thing is that now you can eat Lynn Haven oysters because they're free of contamination.
Okay, so Richard wants to know, can you speak to the pollutant load trading that has occurred to date and how these arrangements are documented or institutionalized?
Virginia, well, I think that there are two states now that have trading programs. Virginia and Pennsylvania have water quality trading programs. Maryland is in the process of developing it if they already haven't developed one. In Virginia, the current program, there was a watershed general permit that was issued in 2005, and this general permit established caps for different watersheds for nitrogen loading. So the wastewater treatment plants in those areas are allowed to trade nutrient loads. If they are doing more than they're required to do, they can gain credits, and they can trade those credits. If there are some wastewater treatment plants that haven't quite met their goals, then they can buy credits. We have been going through an extensive upgrade program since 2005, and some wastewater treatment plants have completed their upgrades, so they have additional capacity that they are not currently using. So at this time, they can use that additional capacity as a credit. So that's basically how it works with the wastewater treatment plants. We're looking at expanding that to other sectors. I think Jeff wants to add to that.
This is Jeff from EPA. I would just add, in general, it's a very timely question because there are a lot of different states looking at the potential for trading. I would say that Virginia has probably been the leader on this. I'm not saying that just to be nice because I'm sitting here with Virginia colleagues, but in 2005 is when actually they developed their program. And I'm not even certain I'd call it trading. It's technically called an exchange program. So sewage treatment plants and industrial plants can move their allocations between themselves. Now that's very clean cut. You do that all through permitting. It gets a little bit more fuzzy when you start talking about trading point sources to non-point sources. And there's a couple states that have programs set up to do that, including Pennsylvania, who actually has had some auctions to sell some of these credits, but none of them have actually been implemented or sold. They've been purchased, but they haven't actually been used to offset loads because we are in the process of trying to figure out exactly what the person who asked the question was getting at, is how do we verify those, what is the mechanism for making certain that we achieve those reductions, and largely they will have to be done through a permitting process. So a permitted point source, if they want to use, for example, reductions that a farmer has generated, somehow those credits would have to be incorporated into that point source permit, and there would have to be some inspection requirements and verification requirements. And I said it was timely because a lot of states are developing these programs right now, and EPA is currently in the process of evaluating all the states' programs.
Okay. So the next question is from Brett. What efforts have been made to actively clean the water, such as through wetland restoration or community cleanup activities?
I think in a number of areas there have been considerable efforts at wetland restoration. We have a pretty substantial program in Hampton Roads and the Elizabeth River to clean up sediments, restore wetlands along the waterway, and we're seeing some pretty positive results with fish populations and reduction in some of the impacts of cancerous tumors on fish and so forth. I think the Anacostia River in the D.C. area has a similar effort, and I can't really speak to that one to any degree.
Well, this is Jeff again. Just in general, I mean, they're two separate things, and we have to always remind ourselves, we've been talking for an hour about reducing pollution and that the bay's impaired, but there's some great restoration efforts happening out there, and we could spend hours talking about all the great things that local organizations are doing. One of them are the cleanups. A number of different organizations around the Bay watershed sponsor bay cleanups and river cleanups and creek cleanups. It has a huge impact on the local water quality. A lot of that is trash removal, extremely important to the health of local streams, but it's really not a component of this TMDL. It's not a nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment sort of action that you're taking. Now on the wetland side, there are permitted restoration of wetlands and there are voluntary restorations, and there's a lot of that happening. Unfortunately, when you look at the pluses and minuses, we still tend to lose more wetlands than we're restoring, but there's a lot of efforts underway to get to a point where we are at a no net loss goal of losing no further wetlands, and a lot of that is happening, as John was saying, at the local level.
Okay. So Stuart wants to know, what is EPA doing to expand backstop options to sources beyond urban NPDES permits?
Well, at EPA, we've got the authority that we've been given to us by Congress. So if we want to expand our authority, that's got to be done through an act of Congress. Right now, there are not any attempts to expand that. The list that I showed you earlier was our existing authorities under existing Clean Water Act through statutes and through regulations. Now that said, there are rulemakings that are in the progress for for urban stormwater, for what we call MS4 localities. And there are some things on the table of, looking at whether or not different thresholds for the size of localities, for permitting, and a number of different things. But that's not directly tied to the TMDL. That's a national rulemaking to address the fact that every year when you look at states' impaired waters list, we have more and more waters that are being listed as impaired from urban runoff. So that's a national rulemaking that's just kind of in the early stages. It's a little too early to talk about what that rulemaking might do. But otherwise than that, we're operating under the existing authorities that we have in the Clean Water Act.
Okay, we have a couple of related questions. So Peter wants to know whether or not you agree that population growth and land development patterns are a critical issue to be addressed to achieve and maintain TMDL limits. And then a bit on the flip side, Nicholas wants to know whether that has increased development cost in order to comply with the plan.
This is John. That's it's one of those difficult questions to fully answer. I think clearly, if we develop without some of the management tools and we do what I would call dumb development, it's going to make it more difficult as time goes forward to meet the TMDL limit. We're probably dumb development. We're going to make things worse. I think there are tools, and if we use those tools properly, we can certainly maintain where we are, and then we're looking at the retrofit issue of how we fix the things that we've already created. Has it made things more expensive? Any developer will tell you, yes, it has. Any local government official who's trying to build roads, schools, any kind of public complex will tell you, yeah, it does cost more money to properly manage stormwater, to properly landscape the facilities, and then certainly to maintain and operate as we go forward.
Okay, and so related to that, what is EPA doing with HUD and DOT to coordinate TMDL with smart growth development?
That's a great question. The federal partners are at the table, and now that we have this executive order that the President issued, they're even more firmly at the table. I mean, this issue, just going back 1 second to this issue of population, it is absolutely a challenge. I mean, you can't dodge the fact that a TMDL is a cap. You have to stay underneath that cap, and obviously it gets harder and harder to stay under that cap the more and more people that you have. So that is a key component that is often overlooked in the TMDL, that we have a challenge getting down to the cap, and then we have an extreme challenge staying under that cap. And that's where this whole issue a few questions ago that we talked about was trading. You know, trading is a tool you often thought of as to how do you get to your cap. Offsets is the word that's used as how do you stay under your cap. And that's a critical component that we are looking at right now, and states are developing these offset programs. VDOT and HUD, you know, they're at the table. A big portion of, there's a lot of roads in the Bay watershed, and a big portion of the runoff is coming from primary and secondary roads, and they understand that. And we're working very closely with them right now, and there's probably going to be some additional requirements for transportation projects in the new stormwater rule that's going to be coming out, because it is a pretty significant source of runoff, especially obviously in the highly developed areas.
Okay, so a related question to that is, can you speak a little more about nutrient trading and the possibility of trades between the agricultural and industry?
This is Anthony. Virginia is looking at expanding our trading program, and right now we're in the process of doing a study on how to best meet those goals. So we're working with the stakeholders in our wastewater industry and agricultural and urban stormwater industries to try to put together a plan that would help us to meet our Chesapeake Bay reduction goals, as well as give the localities the flexibility to choose what types of pollution reduction programs that they can use to meet their goals. So we're hoping that by the end of December that we will have a plan that we can present to the General Assembly. If anyone wants to stay involved or keep up with that process, then we can make sure that we provide you with additional information on how we are planning to meet how we're progressing on making that study and completing that study. But we're currently in the process of going through exactly what this question asked.
Okay. And Nicholas wants to know, has the general population embraced the efforts, or is it just seen as more regulation? So what's the public response been?
Mixed, I would say. It's always a challenge to get 17 million people involved in this process. I can say the one thing about the Phase 2 process where states are actually reaching out to local governments and getting them involved is there's a whole lot more people now following this process. I always jokingly tell people that the good news is that we have pretty much everybody paying attention now. The bad news is that we pretty much have everybody paying attention now, and that's bringing a lot of issues to the table. And I say it's mixed. I wouldn't say, I say this to a lot of people in presentations, I have never heard anybody, not a citizen, not a planner, not a politician, not a sewage treatment plant operator, say that we shouldn't be doing this. Now that doesn't mean they don't have issues as to how we're doing it or how we're allocating the pollution loads, but nobody has said that we shouldn't be restoring local water quality and the quality of the rivers and streams in the Chesapeake Bay. And that gives me great hope that we can work through a lot of these issues. We can always have more people involved. And I mentioned in my presentation what is different about this, and transparency is going to be key. And I think we're going to see nothing but an upward trend of more and more of the general population getting involved in these discussions as we move forward.
All right. So a perspective developed in the Shenandoah Valley was that in order to take care of the water, every landowner and manager in the watershed had to manage all property for protection of water quality. Any comments on that? That's from Tom.
Well, I would just say in general, I don't know if Anthony wants to add a Virginia twist to it, but it's definitely a challenge. As far away as the Shenandoah Valley is, this is all about land use. This is all about what is the land use and what is the pollution coming off the land. And even though farmland is a preferred use, and we would much rather see as much farmland stay in production as we can in the Bay watershed, it has to be properly managed. And a lot of that, there's a lot of conservation practices going on the ground on farmland right now, and there's a lot of federal and state money being devoted to that, but it has to go further. I think when I was still with the Commonwealth, I think that the goal that we said we had to reach is that 90-something% of all the acres of farmland in Virginia, not just in the Valley, had to have a suite of 3 or 4 or 5 conservation practices put on them. We're not there yet. We can get there. I think there's a willingness for the farmers to do that, but it's going to be a challenge, and obviously it's going to take some additional resources to make that happen.
And this is Anthony.
Okay,
I think,
we have one last question. Okay, sorry.
Well, that's okay. Well, I would just wanted to say the key to our plan is flexibility. We want to give people the tools to meet their goals, and we want to set realistic goals. And we think by doing that we can make this plan economically feasible and also meet the goals of the Bay program. So flexibility is a big thing that we're trying to include in this watershed implementation plan.
Great. We have one last question. This is from Barbara. So a recent article in the Richmond Times-Dispatch quotes the EPA as saying that Virginia has been too reliant on the model in the WIP2 process. Moving forward, is the state considering another approach, and if so, what is it?
I'll let Jeff start off.
Let me start. I think that quote was from this Jeff Corbin guy, so I'll go ahead and what our focus has been is that the model and I think even Anthony agreed in his presentation, the model works very, very good at the state level. It works very, very good at the river basin level. And that's how we allocate through EPA the allocations to the states. And then the states, through their planning process, break it up into finer allocations. And what my quote was getting at is that, we know, heck, even if we took the model away and went back to 3 versions of the model ago, we were developing cleanup strategies in Virginia and the other states, and we knew what we needed to do. We were putting together plans, and we knew that we had to upgrade sewage treatment plants. We knew we had to get more practices in urban areas. We had to get more conservation practices on farmland. So it's just been a bit frustrating that the better that the model gets, the more we focus on exactly what we have to do and where we need to do. I mean, we pretty much know what we need to do, and I don't mean to say that the localities and states should not be raising these issues. We need to make that model as good as we can, but the model was never developed to say, okay, County A, here is what your load is. The model was designed to figure out what the loading allocation for each major river is, and then using your implementation process, you figure out what practices you're going to put on the ground. So somehow we need to get past this point where we're focusing on the model and we start focusing on implementation.
And this is Anthony. On the Virginia perspective, and I agree with most of what Jeff said. I mean, the model is a tool, and it should be used as a tool. But the way EPA is using it, EPA uses that model to grade our watershed implementation plans. They use it to grade our 2-year milestones. So if we're looking at putting together a plan and using flawed numbers, then that plan is not going to work out in the end. So we would like to see EPA take some time out and look at some of these model issues. We've had several meetings over these model issues, and I think we've gotten to the point where EPA understands what these issues are, but trying to get them fixed in a timely manner so they can accurately evaluate our program and accurately evaluate how we're progressing in our program would be extremely helpful, and I think it would make this whole big process a lot easier on the localities, on the states, and on EPA.
This is John. Just one more comment on that. I agree with my 2 colleagues. The numbers become particularly important at the local level to the extent that the TMDL includes numbers, and the way I think everybody understands the stormwater and the wastewater permit program is that whatever the numbers are in a TMDL, those waste load allocations become the numbers that end up in permits and govern the compliance objective or compliance obligation of local governments. And that is the area that I think Hampton Roads and its localities, and I suspect my counterparts throughout the watershed, have been particularly concerned and hung up about the numbers, and why we have urged the state and the federal government both to use the numbers as an indicator but not use them as permit requirements.
Great. We are now out of time, but I want to thank everybody for joining us today and thank our speakers for this great overview of the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Program. As a reminder, we will provide the slides and the audio and video from today's session. This will be up later in the week on the Utah-APA website, and we thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.
The organizer